Wayne Brown, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Wayne, you work with many adolescents who are dealing with trauma, self-harm, or even suicidal ideation, right? All which are related to loneliness, anxiety, and depression. How worried should we be about the current situation regarding the high prevalence of these mental states in the youngest among us?
The issues with self-harm and suicidality is continuing to grow in light of current political realities, not just in my home country, but how my home country is impacting the rest of the world. It's not going to get better anytime soon. I work with a lot of clients who are being impacted by current political circumstances directly. And one of the concerns that I'm hearing from clients repeatedly is I don't feel safe here. And where do I go where I would, where my country's politics would not impact my safety?
Right.
So a lot of self-harm and suicidality generally is it's a coping mechanism when things are so out of control that people tend to shut down. We would refer to it as dissociation over longer periods of time. So there was a song back in the 90s with the lyric, I cut myself open just so I can feel. And that's one of the lyrics that my people who do struggle with self-harm most identify with.
Right. Right, and I do think it's getting worse. In 2023, about 1 in 5 children and young people aged 8 to 25 years had a probable mental disorder in the USA. This was 20% of 8 to 16-year-olds, another 23% of 17 to 19-year-olds, and another 22% of 20 to 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
In the US, approximately 12% of adolescents have serious thoughts of suicides. That's 1 in 10. 1 in 10.
That's
What
a
is
low
going
number.
on? Why is this younger generation suffering so much?
I promise you the number is higher than 10%. I promise you it's probably at least 15 to 20%. However, it's the honesty of the reporting. Yeah,
Because many
it's
people, it could be underreported because they're afraid to report, right?
correct. Especially with adolescents. With adolescents, there is, if they're in a home where they're telling their parents that they're dealing with depression and suicidality, that parents or guardians will say, well, I don't want you talking about it outside the home. Don't tell your school counselor. Don't tell your this person or that person, because if you do, then someone in the government will come and take you away. And the fear of further destabilization keeps a lot of kids from seeking the help that they desperately need. So they suffer in silence until there's really a significant event that it becomes unavoidable to manage. Um, the hospital near to my home, it's a county hospital, a government hospital that specializes in crisis care. They have a unit specifically for critical psychiatric events. This is usually individuals who are not just having suicidal ideations, but are classified as a danger to themselves or others. Um, they recently updated their rules to state that if you as an individual are in need of admission and you are under the age of 18 years of age, you are required to have an adult present in the hospital for the entire time that you're there, otherwise triggering a child protection investigation.
Wow.
So while that intent is is well-meaning, all you're doing is further quieting people's willingness to report when the emotions are too much until it's really, it can't be ignored.
Right, but if we continue like this without proper intervention, we are looking in a future society that is very dysfunctional and perhaps even at the brink of its own self-destruction. What can we do in a societal level to help these kids become flourishing future adults that live robust lives? And what can we do on the individual level to help those in our immediate vicinity, our kids, our brothers, our nieces? How do we tackle this?
The answer is incredibly simple and horribly complex at the same time, because it's the ability to sit with our younger people and hear their reality, hear their perspective, be open to hearing things that make us feel uncomfortable, and ask how to most be supportive. What can I do to help you through this emotion?
Right. Listening
Um,
to them.
every individual is going to have a different specific need. I'm from Generation X, the generation that parents believed in kids should be seen and not heard. And many of my friends did struggle, and it was something that no one talked about. I think the upcoming generation is not struggling more than our generation did. They are just vocalizing, at least passively, usually through social media, what many of my peers experienced growing up. I think back to being Generation X and how many of my peers did things casually that today would definitely be defined as high-risk behaviors. And in hindsight, knowing what I know now that I didn't know then, there's a lot of patterns of how many of our high-risk behaviors were due to a lack of fear of consequences.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what high-risk behavior is about. It's, okay, maybe I'll get hurt and maybe I'll die, whatever. Someone who is in a mentally and emotionally healthy place is not dismissive of that direct correlation.
Right. Right. But I think it also personally it it has to do a lot with the family, obviously.
Yes.
So the dissolution of the nuclear family plays a very big role in the development of healthy children, especially when it comes to boys, to young boys, being raised without a father figure around, where the lack of paternal image leads to delinquent behaviors, mood disorders, as well as financial and educational difficulties further later in adulthood. Are those kids lost, or are there programs out there aggressively trying to fix this? Is someone trying to fix this?
I worry, and I hear what you're saying, Francesco. I worry that that's a bit simplistic, though. Not every child who has a birth father makes a good parent.
Right.
I work with many families where the birth father is struggling with addiction or is mentally or physically abusive, or just doesn't even know that they're a parent because they went out one night and they were partying, and a few months later the mother or the other parent does not know how to get a hold of this one night stand. Not everyone who has a one night stand keeps their name and number.
Is ready to be a parent, yeah.
So I think there is a glaring lack of role modeling today. I don't know that is necessarily gender alone that is the obstacle. There are plenty of female role models who do wonderful jobs raising young men into strong adult males who raise their young men and young women to be strong and productive figures. And there are plenty of fathers who really raise crappy men who cycle the same behaviors that they learned from their father, who learned from their father, who learned from their father. I work with a lot of parents on managing the desire to use corporal punishment. For many, many fathers, when I say there's got to be an alternative to corporal punishment, they hear that as, well, that's what my father did, and that's what my grandfather did, and that's what my great-grandfather did, and therefore you're saying that I'm wrong as a parent, and my father and my grandfather was wrong as a parent. I refuse to accept that. Getting someone to break the cycle of trauma, to break the cycle of abuse, is incredibly complex and requires slow and deliberate action.
Right, right. And since we mentioned that not everyone who has a child is ready to be a parent, and there are such dysfunctional families, I want you please to give me your opinion or what a dysfunctional family looks like, because we all, or many, might grow up like, at some point I was angry with my own parents for certain decisions that they've taken. And I might have thought, oh, that's mean of them. But we might think that we had a tough childhood in a dysfunctional family, but maybe it wasn't really. Maybe we thought it was that. So what does a proper dysfunctional family look like, more or less?
For me to draw a picture of a box that fits one dysfunctional family is impossible. I promise you, my children, who are raised in an incredibly loving home that is nurturing and supportive, my kids hear no way more often than they say yes. So if I were to answer your question in kind of an inverse type way, if that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
I would say a functional family is unconditionally loving. And unconditional love and support truly means that you love and support your child even when they make you angry, even when they do something to disappoint you or to cause their own trouble or misfortune for the family. Children are naturally curious because children are not small adults. They only have as much information as they have acquired. So parents who do get frustrated with their children for making decisions that we as adults think are perfectly logical can end up becoming emotionally and or physically abusive. And emotional abuse is just as dangerous to the well-being as physical abuse. Neglect is just as dangerous as emotional or physical abuse. A child witnessing their sibling or their other parent being emotionally or physically abused is also triggering and does cause the same negative emotions, the same negative toxicity to the brain. So I want for us to raise children in a thriving household or in a thriving home is to be interested in what the child has to say, to be open to hearing what the child has to say, that the child knows that they will receive redirection and sometimes they will receive scolding, and that scolding is followed by open dialogic communication. So children, using them as an example, I will scold them when they do something wrong, and after I'm done correcting them, I'm going to check in with them to see if they understand why they got in trouble. I'm going to have them explain to me what I believe they did wrong. I'm going to listen to and correct them as far as what made me angry in the first place. And then we're going to work on a strategy to go forward so that mistake doesn't happen again. Children are not the enemy. Children are not the rivals. In a healthy and happy family, everyone is working towards the happiness of the family unit. And that can happen with a blended family. It can happen with a birth family. There's no one recipe on how to make a happy family. There's no one recipe on how to make a toxic family. It's how well do the pieces work together.
Right. Very, very beautiful said. Very nice. But unfortunately, there is, as far as I know, there is no education on how to be a parent. Like,
You're right.
no one teaches you what to do, what not to do. Best practices is just maybe some anecdotal advice here and there, but truly, no one teaches you how to be a parent, so it's tough.
Typically, in my country, if you are in a parenting class, unless you're actively choosing to attend, like, you're pregnant, your spouse is pregnant, and it's your first child, you don't know anything, and you choose to pay money to sign up for a class, then you will learn. There was a wonderful book that I read when I found out that my spouse was pregnant with our first child. I get nothing from promoting this book, but I thought it was a wonderful tool in helping me to learn how to be a parent when I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And I cannot remember the name of the author, but the title of the book is Dad's Pregnant Too. And it's about the whole process of pregnancy. Then how do you support your partner through the pregnancy? How do you support your partner in the hospital? How do you support your partner and your child after the child is born? But that was a deliberate action on my part because I knew that I didn't know crap about parenting and I wanted to learn. You're right. Not every parent or anticipated parent is excited, is willing to do the work to be a good parent, is functionally wealthy enough or educated enough to pursue the information that is available. For too many parents, they don't get their first parenting class until a court has mandated it. And by that point, you're playing from behind as far as growing a healthy and well-intended family.
Right. And that, well, when I said that, I had in mind because I grew up in Greece, in the Balkans. So there is not a country as progressive as the States. So even these parenting classes, they didn't exist certainly when I grew up, but maybe even now they should be very scarce because it's also a cultural thing. And since we, in a way, my observation is that we stopped, let's say, listening to the wisdom of the people before us, whatever wisdom they had, and we also don't have the luxury to, as you said, pursue this education, either because it's cultural or because of resources or anything. Yeah, it just leaves parents in a very, very tough spot.
You're right. And more than that, I live in New York State, which is most people think of as an incredibly progressive state. It's really not. New York City is progressive. Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo are progressive. And the rest is really not. And actually, while where I live is an incredibly progressive and supportive community, I also live 10 minutes away from one of the most conservative districts in the country.
Okay.
So
there's no excuses.
well, your home address is so determinant as to your quality of life. And there's a ton of literature really reinforcing that your birth zip code, your birth mailing address, has a massive impact on the rest of your life. And that's daunting, because for me as a therapist, for me as someone who works with young people, who works with young families, if I'm seeing your child for the first time at 12 years old because they won't listen to me and they're yelling and they're doing this and this and this behavior that I don't approve of, and I need you to fix that. My coming to the child and being child focused and saying, tell me what's going on. How can I be of service to you? That's where you get into the cliche of saying, oh, you went to the therapist and they told you why your parents are horrible. As a therapist, it's not my job to tell the child that their parenting is awful or that their parents have done an awful job raising them. Parenting is the most difficult job in the world. And it's the most unheralded job in the world. And we can all do it better. I consider myself a good parent. I consider myself incredibly involved with my kids' lives. I'm interested in their thoughts, their feelings, how to meet them where they're at. And my goal as a parent is to make sure that I give them the tools that when they become parents, they are a far better parent than I was, because they're raising my grandchildren. So I want my grandchildren to be raised in a warm and loving and caring household.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want us to talk about social media, because social media might be the second most influential thing in a child's mental state, other than the parents, let's say, at home.
I totally agree.
If not the first, I don't know. How does modern digital culture, including social media, shape the way adolescents process emotional distress?
There was literature published, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, that demonstrated that Mark Zuckerberg at the time was altering and tooling with people's Facebook feeds to see how it impacted people's emotions, to see how giving people a primarily optimistic, positive thread would impact what you clicked. Then with others, he would feed them more negative, more unpleasant news and see how that impacted what you clicked and where you clicked.
Yeah.
Social media it's a dopamine pit. And people are addicted to their phones. They are addicted to social media because when you post something online and you get the little thumbs up or you get the heart or you get whatever that social media's positive indicator is, your brain sends a little positive burst of energy to you. And people grow addicted to that and they grow needing of it. How do we break the addiction with that? It's extraordinarily difficult. It's a deliberate action for someone to put down their phone. Where I am, it's wintertime. Currently, I think it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit where I live. So that is about -7 Celsius, which
That's
is
cool.
a little cold. It's windy, it's icy. My kids aren't coming home from school today and playing basketball. There's no way that's happening. And when the weather changes, there is an expectation that you are outside for X amount of hours, weather provided. Yeah, I would love for my kids to play out in the rain. That's not something this generation does. Still, getting out there, getting moving, biking, playing sports with the neighbors, being involved with your community gives you that same chemical burst in your brain, only more of it than you do from social media. The problem is social media is passive. So I can sit on my couch and I can scroll and scroll and scroll. Oh, look, I got a like for that funny post. That felt good. It's
Really.
more easily accessible. It's the same burst of happiness that you might get from eating a good piece of chocolate or from having some sort of other comfort food. And this gets into the problem of when we've got individuals getting back to the suicidality and self-harm, when people are struggling with depression, with loneliness, with sadness, with chronic sadness, it becomes that much harder to make healthy food. It becomes that much harder to go out for a bike ride. It becomes that much harder to engage with our neighbor. So the lower we get, the harder it is to do the things that are going to get us out of that low mood. So we rely more on fast food, which is easy, quick, and cheap, than sitting down and making a nice meal, which might provide positive emotions from the engagement in making the food, from the olfactory engagement, from the engagement with peers, whoever we're cooking for, all these little attainable landmarks of positivity we're missing out on, because if your depression is growing, 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 the thought of sitting down and making a delicious stir fry is the thought of hiking a mountain in nothing but your bath slippers.
Yeah.
So depression doesn't get cured in one action. It doesn't. It's a multi-step, intentional act, which is why social media is so addictive, because it's convenient and it's easy and I don't have to work for it.
Yeah, it's that instant gratification that whenever we want it, just a click. We don't have to fight for it.
It entertains me to see, because my generation and older loves to look at the younger generation and say social media is just the problem of the youth. That's their problem. The next time you're in a big box store or in a grocery store or someplace where there's lines, look at how many adults, people my age and older or slightly younger, have the screen right in front of their face. It's not just a curse of the youth. It's the same rat cage and pellet that we're all chasing.
It is absolutely. It is, and I'm glad you mentioned how it's not just the youth's problems. and it's a societal problem. But getting back to the youth, just because I've had a recent experience as someone who used to be in a management position not so long ago. I noticed how difficult it is for, let's say, 18 to 22 years old nowadays, let's say, to focus at work, not to reach for the phone, not to constantly be late, and even call sick just because they can't be bothered. And I personally believe one of the reasons is because social media has ruined many jobs, which are now considered boring. Because by showing people that it is possible to make millions by dancing in front of your phone, who wants to be a police officer? Who wants to be a firefighter? Who wants to be just a waiter anymore? I'm not going to show up for work. And some of them are tough jobs, but we need those jobs. And so the damage is, in a way, very indirectly of we're losing very, very important jobs that are the base of society. Like we don't need any more dancers on TikTok. We have enough of those. They don't really produce anything. So yeah, I also worry about that because it's very hard to find, younger stuff nowadays.
Well, I teach at the university. I teach up and coming social workers, and the age range of my students on the low end is early 20s, on the high end is mid 30s, 40s, like 35 to 40 era. There are plenty of people who are not dancing on TikTok.
Sure.
Maybe they're trying to do that as a side hustle. I don't think too many people really, they may try it and then discover quickly that it's not everyone's an influencer. Things have changed as far as work dynamics, and I think that the 10-80-10 rule will always be in effect. 10% of the population will always be your high performers. 10% of the population will disengage or wash out. And 80% of the population is going to do good enough and will function, not thrive, but will do what they can to get to a pension and retirement.
Right. So maybe this is just what it seems if you focus too much on the online world and the news, and the more time you spend online, the more people you tend to see more people like this and more stories like this.
It's confirmation bias.
It's confirmation bias.
Right. This is what I see in my circle. So this is, everyone's on TikTok. Are a lot of people on TikTok? Yeah. It doesn't mean that everyone on TikTok thinks they're gonna be the next celebrity. They may try to be, but they quickly discover that there's only so much money that they're going to earn.
Not everyone will be a millionaire. Not everyone will be a celebrity.
Right.
Statistically impossible.
Yeah. Statistically, it is beyond impossible. And letting someone have their fascination of being a TikTok dancer, whatever. If you're dancing, you're still moving around, and that's getting you that energy. It's getting the momentum. It's getting you up off the couch. I'd rather have you dancing for TikTok in your free time than sitting on the couch watching other people dance on TikTok.
At least you're trying. At least you're putting in the work.
Right. And maybe you don't become a millionaire, but maybe you get some followers and you get some of the validation that you're looking for, and you feel a little bit happier. So that way you can go out and do the next thing and feel that little bit better. And then I feel a little bit better now, so I'm going to go do the next thing, and then the next, and building towards something, building momentum.
That's a good point of view. I've never seen that as actually building momentum, as that actually making you, as you said, just more, give you that sense of relief that you need for you to kind of attack the world and get more forward.
Momentum is incremental. No one goes from super depressed into happy as a lark any more than someone goes from happy as a lark into super depressed without some sort of activating event. So if I'm depressed, I'm low, I'm really struggling to survive, and then I win an objectively offensive amount of money in the lottery, I'll feel happier, but the high of winning all the money is going to come down, and I'm going to feel less happy. If I'm doing great, even if I get the most catastrophic news, I'll be more equipped to manage that catastrophic news because I'm generally in a good place. What we refer to it as is homeostasis. So homeostasis is where we tend to be at rest. So when we're at rest, when we're not performing for our boss, we're not performing for our kids, for our spouse, for this, for that, where is our emotion? Where is our mental state when we're less activated in intention?
Interesting.
And that can go up and it can go down depending on how you're managing your life. But, diet, nutrition, exercise, moving around, engagement with peers, engagement with friends, engagement with loved ones, all these actions do impact where is your homeostasis. Growing up, do you feel safe talking to your parents? I have so many parents and guardians who I talk to who will get right up in their kids' faces and yell at them, "Why don't you trust me? You should trust me." In what world does that build trust?
Yeah.
We need to be able to look in the mirror critically and see it's the old line of, if you're yelling at me to trust you, then there's probably a reason why I don't. My clients who are constantly telling me how successful they are less convincing than the people who just go out and do their thing to be successful.
No, I believe that. I believe that for sure. This reminded me of, this is very common back in the Balkans, where when a kid is in public with the parents and is like stumbles and hits, and then the parent goes and hits the kid
Yep.
for falling. So instead
Mhm.
of caring for it's like, oh, did you just hurt yourself? Let me hurt you more to
Right.
punish you from hurting yourself. It's so funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sad but funny.
It's so much. The thing that I want parents to realize is a tap on the bottom in anger is no different to the human brain than the most violent hit. So a tap on the bottom or a threat of corporal punishment, the brain doesn't differentiate the threat, because I don't know how hard you intended to hit me. I just know that I got hit by someone who I'm supposed to trust. So that light hit is just as traumatizing, is just as fear inducing, because I don't know what you're going to do next. I don't know how much danger I'm in right now. And when you're in fight or flight mode, your brain is going to protect you above all else. And the more you go into fight or flight mode, the more you feel afraid of your adult, the more negative impact it has on the heart and the brain. And the more we get conditioned to not only distrust our adults, but also to distrust ourselves. I have so many teenagers who believe that, or have worked with so many teenagers over the course of my career, who believe that they are horrible people because the people who they most trusted, their adult figures, regularly told them what a disappointment they are, or how badly they do things, or how they embarrass their family through their actions, or something that they did brought shame upon the family. Really? Your kid, I don't know, vandalized a bridge in town and you brought shame on the entire family? Is that not a bit hyperbolic? What can we do other than the greatest amount of psychological damage? You can be
Yeah.
upset with the kid. You can work with the kid on coming up with a solution and let them face some consequences. But it's the community's job to dole out the consequences. It's your job to say, yeah, you goofed. How do we fix it and go forward?
Yeah. And these kids will grow up and they will become, as we said, depending on the current cultural paradigm, maybe they will broadcast whatever they have into the world, but maybe they will just keep it with themselves, as perhaps your generation, you said before, they used to keep it. But I can't help to think how many individuals we have in our own lives that could be secretly struggling from any of the things that we mentioned so far, but we just aren't aware of because of how they hide it. What are some signs, and again, this is quite general, what are some signs that someone around us might be suffering from a mental disorder? Or mainly you can answer about depression, since we already mentioned it, because depression is a very overused word nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
again, mostly online, and people tend to self-diagnose themselves with depression, either because it's trendy, either because that's all they know, either because someone told them that's what they have. How can we tell that if a loved one is going through something like that?
So before I answer that, what I'd like to do is maybe offer some clarification for your audience. What's the difference between anxiety and depression? Because anxiety and depression are closely related and not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference between anxiety and depression is depression tends to exist when we're living in the past with a past memory that we feel badly about. And because it happened in the past, we cannot access that to fix it. I failed a test. I got yelled at by my parent. I got into an auto accident. I lost my job. And whatever that depressive event, whatever that event that's causing us to feel sadness, or the accumulation of depressive events that I no longer have access to, because one depressive event can trigger another and another and another, increasing that sadness into a more permanent state or a more continuing state. Anxiety is emotions of fear of the future. So I'm fearful that I'm not going to get the job. I'm fearful of how I'm going to do on the test. I'm fearful as to what my parent, my guardian, my teacher, my professor, my mentor is going to say to me about me. I'm afraid of this thing that hasn't happened yet that also I have no control over. So when you're dealing with depression, you're living in the past. When you're dealing with anxiety, you're living in the future. The most challenging place to be, and where true peace comes in, is to at most be living in today. I like to remind my clients about be where your feet are. You're here right now. Maybe you'd rather be on vacation. I'm going on vacation in a couple of weeks. Would I rather be on the beach right now? Of course. And as soon as we're done talking, I'm going back to work. So wanting something to happen can be a positive anticipation. And when it's a collection of all these fears of the future, that's where the anxiety comes in. Too many fears and sadnesses about the past, about unfulfilled or misadventures or what have you, is where depression lives. So, what are we looking for? We're looking for how it manifests really within that person. Strong emotions makes us more of who we are. So if you're someone who tends towards being more withdrawn, more conservative, maybe you shut down more. Maybe you isolate more. You spend less time with peers. When you are with peers, you make yourself smaller. Others who might be experiencing depression can be experiencing it as really large, loud events where it's, almost like a notice me type behavior. Other people who have more addictive inclinations, it might come through as self-harm. It might come through as reckless behaviors, such as reckless substance uses or active behaviors. One of the things that I like to remind my clients' family members is that when it comes to addiction, most people's substance use starts in a place where, hey, my friend gave me this substance to try, whether it's a beer or a hard liquor or cannabis or some other heavier drug. And the first time or two that we use it, we feel really great. And as the greatness feeling wears off, because the greatness feeling does wear off, we continue to use because we're not feeling as much from our daily life. We feel less by using. So we have a couple extra drinks. We have a couple extra puffs. We spend more money at the store seeking that dopamine hit of, I'm going to feel better because I have this new thing, forgetting that, 20 days from now, the credit card bill is going to come and we're going to feel less good. People who are less happy become more of who they are. So when I'm feeling sad, I'm not the person who's going to jump up and down and scream. I'm going to make myself smaller. When I'm feeling anxious and my heart is racing and I'm having a hard time focusing, I'm still going to be quieter. But if you say or do that thing that spikes my anxiety, I might start yelling for a moment. And then I usually apologize right after I'm done yelling because I'm like, oh God, I can't believe what I did. People are more of who they are when they feel stressed.
Fascinating. What is the one thing we should be paying the closest attention in the upcoming years when it comes to adolescent depression, anxiety, loneliness, or even just teen mental health more broadly?
I would say if you've got people in your life who you love, who you care about, who you feel affection for, just being more present in their lives, being more actively engaged, noticing when they are not the way they typically are, and being okay with just checking in and having them say, I'm fine. Is it possible that they are not fine and they just don't want to talk to you? Yeah. And that's got to be okay. If you have adolescent children and they don't want to talk to you, find them a professional who they can talk to. Because trying to bully your child into communicating with you only shoves them farther down and makes their emotions more inaccessible. We want them to have the opportunity to build the confidence, to build the language, to feel happier, to feel safer. And then hopefully the parent, the adult, the guardian can begin to meet with their child and with their child's counselor and come up with mutually acceptable ways to build a bridge of communication. If there's no bridge to communication, forcing one doesn't work. Building one cooperatively where the child can say, I would feel better if you were to say or do this. I like to build in signals for people who don't have the willingness to talk in the moment, but will later. So like as a social worker, sometimes I come home from work and I always love seeing my kids. And sometimes it's been a stressful day and I just don't have the bandwidth to be dad right this second. I had to call child protection. I had to deal with an angry parent. An angry parent just finished yelling at me. My boss just finished yelling at me. I'm in a place where I can't be on my best. So the code for me is I will, let my spouse know I need to go upstairs and change. That is the clue to my spouse to tell the kids, okay, you just stay down here. Dad'll be back in 10 or 15 minutes. And getting upstairs and having the quiet time for me to do my positive coping skills, to ground myself, to be more present in my head, then I can come downstairs and get their positive energy, and that will help me feel better rather than I'm up here irritation wise and everyone coming in and hugging and touching and screaming at me is overstimulating. So it gets me to the point of getting upset at their positivity, which is incredibly confusing to children. It gives me that opportunity to reset. Some people will just be like a little pull on the ear or some other sort of signal where it's, I don't want to talk now, and I promise to check in later.
Nice. No, I like that. That's such a nice tool to have in your in your arsenal of tools to use. And I like how powerful you made that communication, how important you make it sound to be, which it is, because this is what many of us lack nowadays, real engagement. I was reading this article by The Telegraph this morning. It said about 1 in 5 Brits aged 18 to 24 have one or no close friends at all. And the irony of the 21st century is that the world is more connected than ever, yet we are the loneliest we've ever been. So we've exchanged relationships for followers, and we called it connection. We send each other memes, and we call it communication. We read headlines, and we call it getting informed. And it's safe to say we are mistaking noise for meaning, and we are the online presence for intimacy. In your opinion, how do we reverse the harm the online world has done to our youth, or even to us? And how do we take extreme measures? Do we introduce a ban of social media until someone is 18, or are there perhaps different, less radical approaches we can take?
It's intentional engagement. It's choosing to unplug. It's choosing to be present. Banning social media is it's a fun little thought exercise. But again, growing up in the generation I grew up with, I smoked my first cigarette when I was 11 years old. And it wasn't legal until I think at the time it was 18. Banning things doesn't make them unavailable.
True. That's the whole drug industry out there.
What is the motivation for meaningful connection? What is the motivation for being present? Being with other people's emotions is extraordinarily difficult and uncomfortable and scary for people. So being present in other people's lives is a radical act.
Okay, Wayne, last question.
Yes.
What do you want to be remembered for?
I would like to be remembered as a good dad and someone who helped some people along the way. And hopefully my kids, when they're parents or when they're professionals or whatever their path holds for them, that they're able to bring light to a dark world.
Well, Mr. Wayne, you've been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking.